Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Claire's Circle. We spend months preparing for a baby's arrival. We read books, we go to classes, we make birth plans. We imagine this moment as something beautiful, intimate, the culmination of our love. But what happens when everything goes off plan? What happens when the expected experience, full of strength and harmony, turns into a medical trauma that leaves invisible scars? And what if the person closest to you, your support system, can't or won't see those wounds? This story comes from a subscriber named Laura. It's a story about birth trauma, about postpartum depression, and about the desperate need for support that never came. It's a story about how lonely you can feel in a room full of people and in a marriage that seemed perfect. Laura and her husband Greg were the model couple. They'd been together since college, best friends who always did everything together. When they found out they were expecting their first child, their joy knew no bounds. Laura describes her pregnancy as one of the happiest times in her life. She felt great, was full of energy, and looked toward the future with optimism. They went to parenting classes together. They learned breathing techniques, studied different positions to ease the pain. They made a birth plan, but as Laura writes, it was a flexible one. She wasn't a natural birth fanatic. She was completely open to an epidural, but secretly hoped her labor would be smooth and quick, and maybe she could handle it on her own. Greg was her champion. He promised to be her advocate, her protector in the hospital, her rock. They were sure they were ready. They were a team embarking on the beautiful journey called parenthood. The journey turned into a catastrophe. Labor started on time. For the first few hours, everything went by the book. But then her labor stalled. It went on for hours without becoming productive. The pain, Laura says, was indescribable. She had prepared for pain, but not for this, an all-consuming, animalistic pain that gave no moment of respite. This was the first stage of shock, the realization that your body is in an agony that has no end in sight. She asked for an epidural, but as sometimes happens, it only partially worked. The pain dulled slightly, but it didn't go away. And then the problem started. The baby's heart rate on the monitor started to drop during every contraction. The atmosphere in the delivery room changed instantly. The calm voices of the nurses were replaced by sharp, clipped commands. Doctors rushed into the room. They spoke in their medical language, using terms Laura didn't understand, but that sounded terrifying. They were turning her from side to side, putting an oxygen mask on her face. She stopped being a person preparing to meet her child. She became a problem, a medical case, an object that needed to be stabilized. Greg stood in the corner, pale and frightened. He held her hand, but his touch was weak and unsure. He was in shock, too. The doctor made a decision, an emergency C-section. Laura describes the next few minutes as a terrifying blur, being rushed down a hallway, bright lights flashing overhead. The operating room was cold. She was shaking. From fear, from the anesthesia. She felt completely powerless, as if her body no longer belonged to her. She could hear the clatter of instruments and the muffled voices of the doctors behind the screen. She heard her son's first cry, short and weak, and they showed it to her for a fleeting second. And then he was gone. Due to distress during labor, he was immediately whisked away to the NICU. She had given birth, but she hadn't met her child. She had gone through it all, but she hadn't experienced that magical moment that she'd read about in all the books. The first few weeks at home were a fog. Laura was recovering from major surgery. Her incision was painful, her body was weak. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain. She felt empty, hollowed out. When they were finally able to bring their son home, she would look at him and feel nothing but anxiety. That all-consuming rush of maternal love that everyone talks about wasn't there. There was only fear that she would do something wrong and guilt for feeling nothing. At night, she had nightmares. She relived the birth over and over. The bright lights, the doctor's shouts, the sound of the heart rate monitor. During the day, she could suddenly start crying while just washing the dishes. She felt like a failure. She hadn't been able to give birth normally. She hadn't been able to fall in love with her baby instantly. She was broken. And this is where her main conflict began. The conflict with Greg. He had seen everything that happened in the hospital. He was scared too, but he processed it in his own way. For him, the important thing was that it was over. In his practical world, there was a positive outcome. His wife was alive, his baby was alive and healthy, and that meant they just needed to move on. When Laura cried, he would come over and say, "What is it now? Everything is fine. Calm down." He tried to be helpful. He changed diapers, cooked dinner, let her sleep. But he wasn't giving her the support she needed, the emotional support. She tried to talk to him. She told him about the flashbacks, the feeling of emptiness, the sense that she was a stranger to her own son. She tried to explain her trauma, but he became impatient. "Laura," he'd say, "you have to stop dwelling on the past. The birth is over. You have a beautiful, healthy baby. You should be happy." He told her she was being too negative and dramatic. In his eyes, her feelings weren't symptoms of trauma and postpartum depression, but her choice, a choice to be sad when there was no reason for it. The breaking point came one night, about a month after the birth. The baby was crying nonstop. Laura, exhausted and desperate, sat on the edge of the bed and cried along with him. Greg came into the room. He didn't hug her. He didn't offer to take the baby. He stood in the doorway and said with icy frustration in his voice, "Laura, for God's sake, you have to just get over it. It's been a month. All women go through this. Just pull yourself together and be a mother to our son." In that moment, Laura says her marriage died. He didn't just fail to support her, he invalidated her pain. He accused her of not being able to just pull herself together and stop feeling the way she felt. He diagnosed her and wrote her a prescription. Stop it. She looked at him and said, "What I went through was real. My pain is real. And if you can't see that, if you can't even try to understand, then you are not the partner I need right now." Since then, they've been living like roommates. He performs his duties around the house and with the baby, but there is a chasm between them. She feels like she's living with a stranger who expects her to just flip a switch and fix her own mental health. She ended her letter with a question. "Am I the asshole for feeling like my marriage is in jeopardy because my husband refuses to acknowledge my birth trauma and postpartum depression? Am I wrong to expect more than just practical support? Or is he right? And am I failing my family by not being able to just get over it for the sake of our new baby?"